ora and welcome to the Tourism Chat Show. I'm Michelle Caldwell and it's great to have you back joining us for another episode. Today we have a chat with Jacqui Lloyd from the New Zealand Cruise Association. Now, if you've been listening to the show for a while now, you'll know that we love to do these regular updates on the various sectors in our industry, and this is our third cruise update. So thrilled that Jacqui's been able to join us. You've probably seen recently there was a new study that was conducted looking into the economic impacts of cruise tourism in New Zealand, and some of the findings are really quite remarkable, and Jacqui is going to go into those with us on this show today, so I'm not going to spoil them now. If you want to know more, I urge you to jump on to the New Zealand Cruise Association website, and you'll find under their news section infographic about all of these stats, and you'll also see their latest press release. But, tune into the episode. That's the best place to start, obviously. And Jacqui's going to share some of those tips with you. Now, it's December and we are quickly counting down the days until we get to Christmas. But we have a couple of awesome episodes lined up before we do that. So next week is another Trends Unpacked episode. And the following week, we've got a few inbound operators and friends joining the show to basically have a bit of a debrief on how the year has been for us all. So that will be really interesting because, it's been a bit of a crazy one at times, but overall, I think it's been pretty good for most people. But, thank you for your support. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you to those who've left comments and reviews on the podcast apps that you're listening in on. It's great to see those. Really appreciate your support. Keep sharing these episodes and we'll just keep pulling out new content. We've got some great people lined up for 2025 already. And if you are listening and think that you want to tell your story on the show, don't forget to reach out and just ask. I'd love to have a chat and see what we can talk about. Okay, everybody, have a great week. Enjoy this episode with Jacqui, and we'll be back next Wednesday. Ka kite. So it's time for another cruise industry update, and we're joined today by Jacqui Lloyd, Chief Executive of the New Zealand Cruise Association. Kia ora, Jacqui.
Kia ora. Thank you for having me.
And thank you for coming on to the show. I know I had to twist your arm a little bit there, but it's great to have you here.
Always a pleasure.
Now, as I mentioned to you, we've done a couple of cruise updates over the years, and we've had Debs and Ro from ID Tours on the show doing just little updates for us. But recently you've just revealed this new economic impact assessment study that's been done, and there's been a lot of news in and around the industry about that. But I thought it'd be great to actually hear from you some of the results of that. So just to kick us off, could you summarize some of those key findings from the economic impact assessment?
It's quite an enormous assessment, Michelle. But
it is, I know.
No, look, thank you. No, we were pretty excited about this because previously Stats New Zealand has done the economic impact assessments for New Zealand for cruise, and up until they were doing it from about 2015 right through to just at the 1920 season, not 1920, but 2019-2020 season.
Yes.
When we came back from COVID, unfortunately, they, as with a number, I think cruise was the first that lost the funding for data sets. And so we went out to a separate company called AEC Group, which has been doing the data sets for Australia now for 20 years. And we've asked them to pull this together for us. So it's a slightly different, it's giving us a more in-depth amount of information on cruise than we had before. Before it was just around passenger spend, cruise spend, and an estimate on vessel spend. Now we're looking at direct and indirect outputs. We're also getting job figures. We're also getting wages and visitor days. So it's far more in depth than what we had. So what we're seeing for the direct economic output for New Zealand, it sits at around 637 million for this last season. So that's passenger spend, that's cruise spend, and also through surveys with cruise lines, it's cruise spend in New Zealand. So that's spend like port and charges, food and beverage, Shorex, admin and fuel and other bits and pieces that go with that. Every time a cruise ship comes into a port, they're not just chucking off passengers and the spenders in the tourism sector. It's actually far deeper than that with projects and providors and all the rest. And then we have the indirect and induced piece as well. So that's along the lines of, I guess, if a tour company has a tour that they're selling to a cruise line, then they're also purchasing lunch and ancillary things on top of that for their staff. So that sits at around 729 million. So all up, the direct and indirect economic output for New Zealand for cruise is 1.37 billion, which is pretty impressive. I think what I'd like to point out too is previously with the stats numbers, we were just looking at the direct, and that last year pre-pandemic, it was 547 million. This last season it's 637, which really equates also to that was the largest season New Zealand's ever had. So we were 360,000 passengers, about 100, and I think in the end, with a few cancellations due to weather, about 1,100 port calls around the country. It was pretty big. So we're really happy with it. And then also what we got out of that too is using those clever multipliers that all those clever data people do with Stats New Zealand and the like, just under 10,000 jobs that are coming through from the cruise industry. And that's something I think that we always knew, but it was really good to get a number, because we know when we're hearing and talking to tourism operators, we're hearing people, bringing in new staff for the summer because of cruise. You've got the ports employing new people and additional staff. So we know that there's a lot more economic benefit than just to tourism. It goes broader than that out into our regions as well. So yeah, it was pretty exciting. We're pretty thrilled to have it and looking forward to using this as a benchmark for future years. And because me, Michelle, I can't shut up, is that, and that also we can now compare directly with what's happening in Australia, because we've got this style of data.
Like for like data. Yeah, that makes a huge difference, doesn't it? And what's the feedback been? Obviously, you've been out there spruiking these numbers for a few weeks now. What's the feedback that you've received, both from industry and from government or wider community?
Really positive. And in fact, actually, what's been helpful and good is that we've had a number of either regions or ports that have done their own data sets over these, last season, and they match. While it's not exact because we're using different methodologies, the numbers are sitting in the same realm, not vastly different. So regionally, we're really happy. The regions are happy getting the information, because also while we've given sort of a high level national figure, we can also dig down right into what's happening by region as well. So little port towns like Timaru or New Plymouth or Gisborne or Picton even can actually see what's coming in from a passenger, crew and a vessel spend, which is really helpful when you're talking to your local government. And then also from a central government point of view, it certainly has meant, now that we're showing a value, that there is, I wouldn't say there wasn't more interest before, but it certainly has piqued interest within central government as well, particularly when they're seeing the reduction that's going to be coming for the coming years. I think to be able to show where we're at our peak and what that will mean going forward, it's allowed to get a little bit more support.
Yes. Oh, that's awesome, because there was a lot of chatter around that reduction in port visits for this season, right? Because were we looking at 20%?
Yep. So we've gone, at the moment, we thought we were 898, but we've just popped up a little bit because, bless, it's so awesome. Disney Wonder is going to Taranaki. So
cool.
a little extra port calls popping in there, which is wonderful. So we're just on about 900 port visits around the country. Last year it was booked. The port visits that were booked were sitting at around 1,129, I think, in the end we had. So it has been quite a reduction. And we are looking to see a similar reduction at this stage, we feel, for the 2025-26 season.
So is that a reduction off this year or so another 20%?
Yeah, so the final numbers aren't in yet, and so those bookings are still coming. However, the momentum has slowed from what we understand talking to the port agents, is that where we would normally be at this time of the year for that season we're not quite at. So there's a little bit of work to be done in the back end to try and make sure that we keep it, because it is concerning, particularly for our smaller regions. Well, and all regions actually, but regional New Zealand that doesn't often see a lot of international visitation, Cruise one that actually brings those in.
Yeah, and I was going to ask about that in terms of cruise tourism specifically benefiting the regional ports compared to the larger cities like Auckland, because you mentioned Taranaki there, you mentioned Timaru. They are, the cruise ships are calling into some of those smaller areas. So how does that work for them? Because is there a conflict between local community who go, oh, we're being overrun by tourists on one day, or is it like, let's open our doors and embrace them wholeheartedly?
It's the latter, invariably. In every small port region that I go to, everyone talks about the vibrancy that brings, and actually often the pride that it brings to communities, because they look out and see a ship and they go, oh, heck, we must be interesting. Of course they're interesting. But from a mindset point of view, it just shows, bringing visitors in, particularly for as those regions that aren't on that international trail. They don't often see a lot of. They get some international business, but not a lot. Tauranga, for example, cruise is actually a really important part to the Bay of Plenty tourism ecosystem, as it is with Marlborough, as it is with Dunedin. Those areas that are within broader regions, perhaps, that have got quite a lot of tourism business coming into Rotorua or going into Queenstown, but actually those regions or those townships themselves don't. And that's been really, really important. And in some cases, when you look at it, pre-COVID, some of our larger New Zealand ports, cruise was making up 25% of international visitor spend. So it's actually quite a vital link to come in. And I think the other point of it is that we look at it often from a cruise perspective of just what is coming on economically for the season. Then the next step to that is the repeat visitation that can come off it. Because we have a lot of Australians that come through in New Zealand on cruise. It's about 50% of our business. Many of them, it's their first visit to the country. And we all know how hard it is, blessed, to get Aussies to cross.
Exactly.
There's so much competition for Bali and Europe. They look back to Europe. They don't look at New Zealand often as a destination. So they come through on a cruise. And anecdotally, we hear in every port that visitors or guests are coming into eyesights getting more information because they're coming back on a land-based holiday, or operators say, hey, I just had these guests and they were here 2 years ago on a cruise ship. I heard one the other day. There was a Dutch couple who were flying to New Zealand for 9-week holiday because they came on a cruise 10 years ago and they loved it so much that they wanted to come back. They said retired, they come into money, and they were 9 weeks around the country because they had that taste test.
Yes.
Why they want to come back. So I think we got to look at it in the way of the benefit right now for the season, but what opportunity is there for future? And that's what a lot of our smaller regions do, is use it as an opportunity to create advocates to come back. We call experiences. Everyone really loves it, and the community loves it, and then we go. But you are dead right. The management piece there is, how do you ensure that we're not taking a small township and overrunning it with visitors? Working with RTOs around destination management plans and how we spread passengers through the region, or also working with the ports to ensure that the ports, blessed, don't go, oh, we've got space, bring a ship in. Working with the regions to go, is this the right time?
Does
how
it work?
Have we got a massive event on? Oh, well, heck, we're not going to have a cruise ship that day, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of communication that goes on around bookings, but it's really positive.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you mentioned the rising costs and regulatory complexities that are causing the reduction in cruise ship visits. Is that what's driving next year as well? Have we still got an issue around our costs and regulatory compliance issues here in New Zealand?
Yeah, we do. Look, and cruise is a long lead. So vessels don't just rock up. They're planning their deployment now for 26, 27. So they look 2 to 3 years in advance, and the planning is done out of head offices in either Miami, Seattle, Santa Clarita in California, or in Hamburg, or other places in the UK. So it's not necessarily done here in New Zealand. Where we've been running into issues over the last few years is uncertainty. So
Mhm.
a cruise line has booked an itinerary through the country. They've already, they've costed it up, they've done their budgets, they've sold it to passengers.
Mhm.
And within that 1 year, before the passengers are going to come, the uncertainty has been either government regulations changing at very short notice,
Mhm.
increases in fees, and that's either at a government level or a port level, or new costs that have been put in by local government or unpredictability. They then have to look at, they've already sold the tour and all of a sudden they've got increased costs that they've got to take off their bottom line.
Yep.
Case in point, customs. New Zealand is putting up their charges. If you look at it on paper, it makes sense. You understand why. It's cost of recovery. We get it. But
Yep.
it was a 4-month window of notice, and it was an
Wow.
additional $11 per passenger. This season is 3.2 million across the cruise sector that they
Wow.
need to find off their bottom lines. And when that keeps happening, your head offices back in those other look at a budget line and go, New Zealand's getting a bit tricky,
Yes. Yep. And so do you think if they did, like, you talk about those charges being, you understand them and there's a reason for them and all of that. So if you were able to get, I guess, more notice and they said, okay, this is what's going to happen, but for cruise, we're going to implement it in 18 months or 2 years or whatever it is,
Bang on.
would that make a huge difference to the cruise industry?
Absolutely.
Because they can cost it in. So they're not so much worried about paying it. It's just the fact that they've already sold the tour and there's extra costs that have come in since then.
It is twofold. It's a little bit of both.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right. The first one is give a longer lead, give us a runway of 18 months and let's build it into the cost. However, the other side to it is cost increases have got enormous as well.
Yeah.
And the cruise lines I speak to when I'm offshore, they say to me, New Zealand's always been expensive, but the passenger ratings and the visitor experience had far outweighed that. It was like, gosh, you're expensive, but look how much our guests enjoy it.
Yep.
It's starting to go the other way now that the costs are outweighing the enjoyment factor, what they used to market on. And also, they have now said that New Zealand is the most expensive region that they visit in the world.
Wow.
Across the board, we are the most expensive region for cruising. So when you have other regions in the world that, I go to Sea Trade every year, which is a big of a trade event. It's kind of like Trends on steroids a little bit. It's massive, but focused on cruise. And you've got so many destinations, 120 destinations from around the world pushing and trying to get business. The competition is fierce.
Yeah.
A lot of different ports or regions are putting incentives or, different ways to encourage crews to get there. Then we'll look at us and go, well, heck, you're a bit expensive now. We're going to go somewhere else until things calm down, if you like. So that I think that there is a perception at senior level in cruise industry that New Zealand's unwelcoming to cruise, and that's a hard thing to try and change the dial on, and that's something that we're working on. But it will take, like I say, it's a 2-year lead time, so we've got to be working on that now to ensure that in 3 years we're not dropping any further.
Yeah. And even then, you've probably still got a bit of that perception because those people are still going to be in their roles. So it's quite a big turnaround that you have to make there. How do we compare to the Australian cruise industry? Like what, how do they welcome cruise ships there?
Similar to us. However, their costs are far more controlled. They are seeing growth. And for Australia too, there is a very, very strong home-based market. You've got however many Australians, I mean, they are one of the larger home-based
cruising.
They're a big market for cruise. So
they love to cruise,
exactly. So they'll come to Sydney, they'll go to Wollongong, they'll go to Eden, they'll go to Brisbane, they'll go anywhere, Melbourne, get on a ship and go. So there's a good source market focused in Australia, whereas in New Zealand it's a little bit less. So the domestic cruising's been very strong. They do a lot of cruising around Australia. So they'll take their cruise lines to ATE, Trends equivalent, and they'll be promoting cruise as an option to travel Australia.
Right,
International agents. So they kind of pull into that. So they are seeing a small reduction, partly due to us. Because if you look at it from a international perspective, you have Oceania altogether. New Zealand's not operating in a vacuum, people just coming to cruise here.
Yes, there's a lot of,
back and forth. They're doing Australia and the South Pacific. So when we are causing issues, there's a reduction coming out of Sydney, there's a reduction coming out of Brisbane, and those ports and those regions are concerned about what's happening in our neck of the woods because it's also affecting the tours that are going around Australia.
I would guess that a lot of your role is the advocacy piece and lobbying.
Yes.
Do you get support from those other regions? Because, it is a big, as you say, it's not just New Zealand, it's a regional thing. Do you have support from them to go to our government, or is it not a thing that you do, or?
Yeah, not necessarily. So there's the equivalent of me, the Australian Cruise Association, and we tend to work together offshore when we're talking to cruise lines. So we tend to be doing more around, hey, we quite like that ship and that ship, why don't you bring it down to our neck of the woods? And actually work in partnership too with Papua New Guinea, with Tahiti and with Fiji to try and encourage sort of a South Pacific kind of focus, because the ship they're movable assets. They can go anywhere. And so we're in that South Pacific, the Southern Hemisphere summer. How do we bring people to us rather than to India or through to South America? But we do work a lot with Cruise Line International, which is the membership organisation for about 95 of the major cruise lines, and they're based out of Australia. So we do a lot with them at a government level, and we do a lot with the government relations heads of the cruise lines at a government level. So we have that extra support to come in as well. But from NZCA's point of view, we are giving the New Zealand context to it, because our members range from cruise lines to ports to regional tourism organisations to councils to small tourism product to ground handlers. So we've got quite a range, and so we look at it more at a broader perspective rather than just with a cruise line only focus.
Right, yep. And some of the challenges that you've mentioned are pretty consistent with other sectors of the tourism industry. So what collaboration do you have with the other industry associations to talk to government and the powers that be that make these decisions that make it challenging for all of us?
TIA has been really, really supportive in that space, because they have an association meeting that we do monthly with all the associations.
Right. Yeah.
And we do talk collectively on what issues are and where they cross over. So for things around the border, I've been working really closely with the Board of Airline representatives and with the Airport Association, because we have similar kind of issues, if you like.
Yes.
And so I think, definitely the voice of the associations together has been really good. And TI has been amazing at leading that. I think they've done a brilliant job, and it continues. It doesn't seem to stop. The funnel keeps filling.
I don't think there's ever a magic bullet on this stuff, is there? It's just...
No, it's like whack-a-mole. It's always. And, from an association point of view, from an RTO point of view, you're constantly just putting out fires. That's the key. And so we're hoping to put out fires. So the more people in your fire brigade, the better things go. And if we can work together, it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. How do you think New Zealanders perceive the cruise industry? And do you reckon it's changed over the years?
I think it has, yes. I mean, look, I don't have specifics. We haven't done any full data nationally, but one of the things that we've picked in our national cruise strategy that we put out in August, so the first one ever for the country, was to try and get questions like that within perhaps Tourism New Zealand's questionnaires that go out both to active considerers but also to New Zealanders. That's a long lead, but the ideal would be for us in future that 90% of New Zealanders think cruise is good for the country. And that also means that the cruise industry needs to do a lot to support that. So it's not just, we're not just asking for a quick change. But I mean, certainly Bay of Plenty recently did some research for their region. 86% of residents thought that cruise was great for the region. So other smaller ports and regions have done information on that about the positives and negatives. And invariably it does sway to cruises good for again, it's bringing that vibrancy and pride piece, which seems to be really strong. It's like look, not every ship is 4,000 passengers.
Exactly. Yep.
The ships we have coming in are as small as 120. And there is benefit at all levels because of the size changes. So we're not being overrun with 4,000 pack ships day in, day out.
Yep.
And so that each region sees it slightly differently. And it's around managing the numbers, as we say, to ensure that we keep social license. And it seems to these last season, definitely no niggles. Often I get a call and say, we're having a bit of an issue here with something in a region. How do we fix it? And immediately me and the cruise lines get together, we find out what it is, and we do our best to fix it. Is it meaning that we're not letting, passengers don't perhaps get off the ship till 9 o'clock when all the buses have now finished the school run and now they come and pick up passengers, that kind of thing. What little small tweaks can we make? And that seems to have worked last year really, really well, because we had no niggles, which was great.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah,
For
that's
the
really cool.
Season too.
Very cool. And I think, some of this stuff that you've done through this impact assessment is really good and useful information, because there's a lot of people out there who would just think of cruise purely as tourism, I think, or maybe ports and tourism. But when you start to think about all of those touch points that cruise passengers can have while they're in port, not all of them are jumping on coaches to go off and visit tourist attractions, right? They're dropping into little souvenir shops or even dress shops. It doesn't even have to be souvenir or tourism related shops, just the high streets and cafes. And
Can I tell you a funny story?
Yeah, of course.
Funny. So in Picton, so of course I'm in Marlborough, and in Picton, I remember Hammer Hardware had a sale on when a cruise ship day was in, and it was a sort of a mid-sized ship. There was a lot of Aussies. There's no weight restrictions on what you can take on board a ship. So these blokes were all up there at Hammer Hardware going, what the heck, look at the price of that.
This is cheap.
Power drills and all sorts, and coming back because it was cheap as chips with the exchange rate, and they're all walking back on the ship with all these, cruise passengers buy all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
And then on a next ship, you might have a couple that's doing a $56,000 helicopter ride around the South Island for half a day. It ranges. There's all sorts of stuff that they'll purchase. And you're right. I think having the expenditure data has been really good, particularly too from the cruise line perspective, around that local produce. You get your fresh fruit and vegetables for a ship. They don't come in a container.
Because you don't think about that, do you? You don't think about cruise ships having to restock their supplies when they get to port. It's it's just one of those things that you take for granted. But when it's actually put in front of you to say, this is what they're spending in the regions on the fruit and vegetables and meat and everything else to feed the passengers and house them. It's pretty phenomenal.
Totally. And again, depending on the luxury level of the ship, some of them, again, coming into Marlborough, where we would take the cruise captains and the F&B managers for a lunch when they would come in. Sometimes they hadn't gone off the ship for 60 days.
Yeah.
So lunch with them quietly in a vineyard somewhere and with no passengers around. And on many occasions they would go, oh, we love this wine, and then they'd be having a chat and getting it shipped on board for the next time they were coming through, or bringing mussels on board from the mussel companies that were based down here on a whim, not on a whim, but can you have a ton delivered tomorrow because we're coming into port. It's just those extra bits that it's not just the passenger doing a tour, it's not the passenger buying a cup of tea, it's these other bits that you don't even know are happening, and including the additional fees and charges that come through to ports, they come into regional governments, and they come into central government.
Yep.
For good things, for good reason. But there's a lot of economy that's going into those areas as well.
Yeah, definitely. So what trends are emerging in the cruise sector globally that you're seeing, and how's New Zealand adapting to some of those?
It's interesting. So cruise passengers are getting younger. On average. So you're looking at around, average age now is around 45. I can say younger because I'm over that. So
well, that's younger than what it used to be, right? Because you used to think of cruise as an older.
Oh, like nearly dead, wasn't it? It was, they were all.
Pretty much. Yeah, I wasn't going to say that. But
No, look, when I first started working in with cruise when I was at Tourism Auckland years ago, you knew it was a cruise ship day by the amount of ambulances that used to drive down Quay Street. But it was expensive then. It was super expensive. And to be able to travel to New Zealand, particularly, is it's far away from the equator. The further away from the equator you got, the more expensive the cruise would have been.
Right,
But it's definitely the demographics change. It's got younger. Part of that too is due to a huge amount of multi-generational travel. It's really easy to be able to take a cruise with your kids and your grandchildren, groups of 20, 30. You can do a cruise somewhere, you can see the country that you want to go and have a good experience in the destination, but you've got everything else covered on board. Much easier than carting everyone through planes and taxis and goodness knows what to do, whatever. So the multi-generational side has changed a lot, which has meant that you've also got younger kids who have been cruising at an earlier age, which now go, we want to cruise again as we get older. So the millennial age group is one of the fastest growing for cruise. And to be fair, that will be probably a lot through the Caribbean at the moment, but as they get older again, they'll go further afield because it's a style of travel they do. Accessible travel too is a key part for cruise. A huge amount of people with mobility issues. This is the best and sometimes the only way to travel the world, to be able to see things. You can get easily where you need to be, and accessible cabins, a huge amount of them going on board new builds, and actually retrofitting for accessible cabins as well.
It's interesting you say that, because my best friend broke her foot last Christmas and they were due to go to Vietnam and Cambodia, but of course she was in a moonboat or on crutches and couldn't do it, so they switched to a cruise.
Oh, yeah.
And she said, I didn't think I'd ever enjoy a cruise, and she absolutely loved it. And she had a little knee scooter that she was able to scoot around, and she said it was fabulous. It was just, everything was catered for, and I'd never thought about it from that perspective, but she said it was just so easy.
So easy, and you unpack once. That's the thing. It's so, and then you go. And then the other part that's becoming more common now, or I guess a trend that's happening on board and offshore, on board, and on shore, that's the words I was looking for, is more immersive experiences. So they're looking for more immersive experiences on board the ship, whether that's, cooking classes or cultural, conversations on board, but then also wanting to mirror that with the tours that they're doing when they get off. So that's been a huge step change. A lot of the cruise lines have been building more immersive travel experiences and working in with, be it local Indigenous communities across the globe, or going into, to meet the winemakers or meeting the chefs or doing something really engaging. That's something that's really growing in the cruise industry at the moment. Definitely.
Yeah.
So anyone that's sort of looking to get that kind of, they're interested about getting tours like that on board, that's the angle that a lot of the cruise lines are looking for at this stage.
There also seems to have been, I guess it's similar to the airlines, which are always looking at new seating configurations and new business class seats, those kind of things. And we've seen the Sky Couch option from Air New Zealand, but cruise liners seem to be doing the same in terms of the attractions and the activities and the things that they offer. And some of them look absolutely incredible. I mean, I see a lot of it pop up on social media with indoor skydiving and amazing, like zip lines across the top of the ship and all sorts of things. So when you've had Disney, which
No, and you're right. Look, some of those really big ones, like Icon of the Seas with the huge water parks, they're never going to come to our part of the world. The cruise ships that are coming here are coming for the destination, for that kind of cruising. The ship itself is the destination. And I guess it's the two types of people that you see cruising. The ship's the destination, or the ship gets you to the destination.
Yes, right.
And we are the get you to the destination kind of place. But you're right, the new builds, not only for what they're doing from a visitor experience point of view, but also what they're doing in new technologies from environmental pieces. Sustainability is massive. So there's 56 new ships due by 2028. So they're currently at the shipbuilding globally. There's only, look, I should say, cruise vessels account for 1% of all marine traffic. Right.
Okay.
There's only 320 cruise ships in the world. Yeah, they just move where the sun
all around the world.
Yeah, exactly. They're movable assets. So these new 56 will come on, and older ships will be retired. They'll either be sold or they'll go for scrap or what have you. So the ships are constantly getting newer. And so the new technologies on board are, really, really important, because that's what the passengers are also looking for. But it's things like wastewater treatment plants, recycling capability, the way that they're building to be able to be ready for future fuels.
Mm-hmm.
So at the moment they're working on LNG, but the idea is to be able to change that. And the ships that are being built now are built to be able to change and swap to future fuels of biofuels when they're available at scale.
Yep.
And then also with shore power technology, so to be able to come into a port and plug in and turn
Yep.
the engines off, which is key.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, none of that actually exists in New Zealand and Australia at the moment, but that certainly that's the direction, I think, from a future point of view of where we need to be thinking. I might be going off piste here a little bit, but
No, not at all. No.
where we think where we need to be heading from an infrastructure point of view in the country is very, very similar to in New Zealand and the airline industry. How
Yep.
do we get sustainable fuels at scale, competing against every other region in the entire world? And then how do we ensure that we've got the technology right in ports to be able to use those and deliver those to the ships? How do we make sure that we've got the staff trained? Because this is a whole technology change. This isn't just about,
Yeah.
pumping in a new kind of gas.
It's a whole new industry. Yeah.
Huge, massive industry, and one that the shipyards and the shipbuilders are grappling with as they try and bring in new staff and new teams to be able to work on new builds. And again, that's not just for cruise, that's for all ships. The other 99% of cargo and freight that's traveling around the world, they are going through the same thing as well.
Yep.
So I think where the cruise industry has been lucky enough is that they have been investing billions in this for years and continuing to do it, and actually probably at the forefront of the technology for the rest of the freight and cargo. Apart, there's some of the larger cargoes like Maersk are doing some really impressive things too. But we in New Zealand need to be working closely with the other marine industries to ensure that we capture that future fuel. And that's something that Maritime New Zealand takes the lead on. And that's working with Maritime New Zealand to go, don't forget cruise, don't forget, because deployment in future will be made on where future fuels are and where shoreside capability is. We don't have any of that. The ships won't come.
Yeah, so we've got to start thinking about that now, don't we? So even if it isn't available right now, we need to start thinking about how we might deliver that when it is available.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think everyone's sort of aligned. The cruise lines are pursuing net carbon zero by 2050. So there's a lot of the ships now that are doing a huge amount of work to reduce their carbon footprint. But we need to ensure that we've got the infrastructure in New Zealand right. And then at the same time, what we've indicated in our national strategy is how do we get the tourism supply chain net carbon zero by 2040? Because it's all well and good if you got a fancy ship that's coming in and doing no carbon, but then you jump in a crusty diesel bus to go there. We need to make sure that what we're delivering on the ground matches what the cruise lines are doing.
Yes.
And I think New Zealand's in a perfect position for that with our renewable energy. However, we just, there is a cost. And the cruise lines are open to supporting the cost, but there needs to be a coordinated effort. And that's the next big thing we're working on.
Yeah. And it's probably a whole nother podcast episode, but we've talked a little bit about, all these charges that are coming in various places and ways around the industry. And there's still even more talk now of bed taxes and things like that. Talking to you, it seems more than ever there needs to be this national approach to it, doesn't there? At the moment, it feels a little bit piecemeal, that individual government departments kind of cherry picking what they can from wherever they can, whereas there's no overarching national strategy to say, okay, this is our long-term plan. This is what we need as a country, as an industry, and it's not just tourism, as you touched on there. It's kind of bigger than that. So
it is.
I don't know how we solve it, but
we probably need something stronger than a cup of tea to work that.
I would say so.
But I think I do think you're right around how we work collectively on a lot of these issues. And so if we just park it in the tourism space for now, I think, as I say, the work that TIA has been doing with the associations to get a collective voice, and RTNZ are doing a brilliant job about bringing that regional voice up. And so I think we're all sort of sticking with the same, have the same message. But MB has been really helpful with us, with the cruise industry. Over the last, I've been in this role for about a year and a half, I think. And one of my key goals has been to make sure that cruise is included in the tourism ecosystem. Always, when you look at it, was all, here's tourism, and then
here's cruise.
Yeah. Cruise passengers aren't included in the international visitor arrival. 360,000 came through last year and they weren't counted in our environment. They're spending money in our country. They're not being counted in arrivals because they're deemed as transit because they're not spending technically
they're not overnighting.
Right? Yeah. They're getting on in Sydney. They're coming straight to New Zealand 12 days and then they're going back to Sydney, but they're not counted. So things like that of trying to make sure that we get crews included in the ecosystem because 20% of our holiday arrivals arrive by ship. It's a pretty hefty amount.
It is,
So, it's important for us all collectively to be working together for the tourism industry, and bringing crews on that is another strong voice, I think.
Yeah, definitely. So look, Jacqui, we're running out of time and we could talk all day. I know, well, you could talk all day.
I know, sorry about that.
No, it's great to hear your passion for the industry, and it's really cool to hear an update on what's been happening. But as CEO of the New Zealand Cruise Association, what are your top priorities for 2025?
So we have our national strategy out, which I mentioned earlier. So the key things working through that is better data, which we tick, we're on our way for that. We're needing to activate our communications better around perception of cruise and what cruise can deliver or doesn't, So I think data has been the key point to start that. We can't go out and talk around cruise without controlling the narrative or understanding the narrative. So really important there. Government relations are really important for us. So that's another key focus. Building partnerships, and that's partnerships across the industry. I think that's key for us and one I'm really on. And then looking at how we coordinate national and regional operations. On a cruise ship day, there are so many different entities that are involved. There's no one coordinated piece. The RTOs tend to be the ones that sort of massage it and keep it working. And there's some really, really good regional examples. And I mean, every region does it great. So how do we just continue to work that to get national operations sort of slicked across the country? Because it works really well. How do we just keep improving? So I think those are that's quite a few for the next year. But I also want to, I guess too, I mean, the other one is working in with the cruise lines around that perception problem we've got and ensuring that they understand that New Zealand is welcoming to cruise so that we can lift the numbers in future. And I don't want us to sort of end on a, Debbie Downer. Oh, it's all the, look, passengers are still loving it. Regions are still loving it. I think having our data and also seeing the reduction coming for the future years has maybe woken a few people up into what might be missing. And I think that's positive that we can build on collectively to try and bring our numbers back. We don't want to overrun New Zealand with cruise ships, far from it. We want a managed way of people traveling around the country, but it's a really, really key market to a lot of our small regions and larger ones. Hugely important for Auckland CBD and the hotels within that area for pre and post. So that's a key focus going forward is positivity. Let's be positive. I love it.
And cruise is it's a great case study for what could happen, when all these decisions are being made and there's a bureaucrat sitting in an office going, let's put this price up because it's costing us more or whatever, and they're not thinking through the implications. So cruise actually has become a really good case study of what could happen and, hopefully wakes them up to say, well, actually, let's have those conversations with industry before we make these decisions, and let's work out a date that might suit everybody because it's got to work for all rather than killing the killing the golden goose or
yeah, that's right. Someone said to me the other day, we've just hugged the golden goose too tightly.
Yes.
But I also, you're totally right. I think there has been a perception for many years that cruise is just going to come, and it doesn't. And it doesn't need to. They're movable assets. They'll go where they feel welcomed, and that's what we're currently in that situation for at the moment. So probably there has been a little bit of complacency around it's growth. But no.
And we have had lots of growth. And I guess, we go, well, we're a great country. Of course, people want to come here. The cruise ships have found that they can. And I think it's a positive thing. There are some challenges there for you, but I think, you're doing a really good job. And I've loved hearing what you're up to today. And the stats and data makes a huge difference, I think. So it's been really cool to hear that come out in mainstream media as well, not just tourism media. And you get a bit of cut through in that. So hopefully it'll build that awareness amongst the wider community.
Thanks, Michelle. Rockstar you are.
So are you, Jax. Well, look, hey, I can say it now because it's December. Merry Christmas.
Oh, it's not quite December. What are you
Well, it is
talking
when
about?
we release this
Oh,
episode.
okay, then sorry. We are, yeah. Merry Christmas indeed. I know you put your Christmas tree up in June, so that's fine.
Hey, no, not quite June, but I always want to. I
I
would
think
actually
you
leave
should.
my Christmas tree up all year round if it made sense, but it doesn't quite.
Yeah.
So it is good fun. But look, I have a great summer season. Hope the
Thank you.
cruising happens seamlessly and no more little niggles, and continue
No.
that great run that you're on. I'm sure the industry is really excited about having the cruise ships back in port, and yeah, it's going to be a good one.
Yeah, no, it is. Thank you. We've got a great industry. We've got great regions. New Zealand does this really well. So it's been great. Thank you so much for having me on board.
No problem at all. We'll catch up again next year for a end of year
Oh, yeah.
catch up
I'll let
on
you know how
cruise.
it all went.
Love to
Yeah.
do this every year. So yeah, it's good for the industry to kind of get that cruise update. So you're an
Brilliant.
important part of our sector.
Thanks, Michelle.
Okay. Ka kite.
See ya.